Hello and welcome to a tutorial on how to do a tally mark style health bar system in Unreal Engine 5. Now really quickly, I want to introduce how this tutorial is laid out. I remember when I was first learning Unreal Engine and game development in general, I always found it frustrating when tutorials didn't really explain why something works and what each blueprint node or line of code was doing. I always just felt like I was replicating and not learning. Now, since I've been using Unreal Engine for a while, I actually prefer the more fast-paced step-by-step tutorials that don't have long drawn-out explanations for things I already know how to do. But I want this tutorial to be as accessible to a beginner, but also not be too frustrating to someone who doesn't need the detailed explanations. So using YouTube's chapters, I have broken up each step with an explanation of that step. I'm also trying to keep from jumping too much between different blueprints in this video, so that it is a little bit easier to follow along. So hopefully that will give you, the viewer, an easier way to skip the explanation if you don't need it. Oh, and by the way, if you press Ctrl and the left or right arrows on your keyboard, you will skip to the previous or next chapter in this video respectively. You're welcome. Okay, so to begin, this is just the third-person template using blueprints for Unreal Engine 5. You can really use this for any template you want to start with, but third-person I feel like is a pretty common one to go with. First things first, we're going to go ahead in the main content folder, just add in a UI folder, and we're going to come back to that later. For now, we're going to add just a couple of variables to our third-person blueprint. So let's pull up our third-person blueprint here. And we're going to add just a couple. We're going to need to add in our health. I'm going to make that a type of integer since we're going to do tally mark. And we're going to add in our max health. I'm going to make that an integer as well. I'm going to hit compile here. And let's just set our max health to be 5. Let's go into our event graph here, find our event begin play. After the end of this chain here, we're going to set our max health, we're going to set our health value to equal our max health value. So literally all this is doing is just at the beginning of the game, it's going to set the health value to equal our max health value. Now the reason you would want to have two separate health values, a max health and a health value, is to keep track of what the player's max health would be and what their current health is. So say you have a max health of like 5, as we have here, and you take 3 damage, okay? Well, now your current health is going to be 2. But if you want to be able to heal in your video game, then you're going to want to be able to increase that health back up to 5, but not past 5. So that's why it's always good to keep track of your max health separately from your current health. Okay, and then from here, that is all we are going to do for right now. So let's go back to our content folder here. Let's go into the UI section now. And we're going to go to right click, user interface, widget blueprint, hit user widget again. We're going to call this WBP. I'm going to call this tally mark. I'm going to open up that. Okay, so within here, it's going to be very simple, and this is all this blueprint here is going to be is a representation of our tally marks. So we're going to start off with a size box here. Just drag that in. And if you go up to this option here, hit desired on screen, that will make sure that your size box is actually representative of how it would look on screen. So in this case, there is no size to it, so it's empty. But if you turn on width and height override, let's do a width of 40 and a height of 80. You can see now it's kind of a rectangle there. Next thing we're going to add is an image. Now I'm using an image, but you could use a border or pretty much anything you want. I'm using an image because it's easy to change it out if you did have a particular tally mark you want to display. Like if it's just a slash mark, I'm not going to worry about that here though. All I'm going to do is just change this color here under brush. We're going to click that, tint, and we're just going to change that to be red. Then we're going to go into the padding setting here. I'm gonna add just a left padding of about 8, and that will work. Okay, that's all we have to do for our tally mark, so we can go and close out of here. Next, we're going to make another widget blueprint. I'm gonna call this one Healthbar. So in this one, we're just gonna start out with a canvas panel, and we're going to throw in a horizontal box. Alright, and let's position that box somewhere near top left. This is where our health is going to be displayed at. I'm going to scale it here, but the scale isn't really going to matter. This is just to kind of demonstrate where it will be and help you visualize where you want to place it in your level. So we're going to hit size to content. As you can see, it'll shrink down to nothingness. And we're going to check is variable towards the top of the screen here. And we'll just name this horizontal box to be Healthbar. Go and hit compile, save. Now we're going to hop into our graph here. We're going to add in a couple of variables to begin with. First one we're going to add in is going to be health. This one's going to be an integer. Leave it as is. Then we're going to set in another one here. We're going to just call this player. We're going to make this of type BP third person character, but this would really just be whatever your character class is. Now in here we're going to hit instance editable and expose on spawn. Now to explain what that does, instance editable just means that it can be edited easily from the editor. And it's kind of more of, think of it as a very public variable and very easy to edit. Expose on spawn just means whenever we create one of these Healthbar widgets, this variable will be available for us to set immediately before the widget is even created, which is perfect for how we're going to handle the Healthbar system. So next thing we need to do is we need to add in a new function. We're going to call this function update health. And real quick, we're going to tab back into the event graph, and on our event construct, we're going to call update health. That way, whenever this widget is initially made, it will go ahead and update the player health. So if we go back into update health here, first thing we want to do is we want to set the widget's health variable here. We want to set that to equal our player. If you hold down control, click and drag, get our player, we're going to do get health, not max health, but current health here. Drag that in, we're going to set our health there. Next, we're going to need to add a branch. You can hold down B and left click to add a quick branch. Drag into that. Our condition here is we're going to check to make sure that our health is greater than or equal to 0. Because we don't want to create negative tally marks. Because we're also going to do this using a for loop, which will create errors if we try to use a negative number in our for loop. All right, so next we're going to do a for loop, as I said. For our first index, we're going to do a 1, and then we're going to drag off our health here as our last index. Perfect, just like that. Our loop body, we are going to create widget. And in this one, we're going to create our tally mark widget here. Perfect. And then from here, we are going to get a reference to our health bar, which is just a horizontal box. Drag off that, do add child. And we're going to add this tally mark as a child to our horizontal box. Alright, the next step real quick here, we need to clear out our children for that health bar anytime we call it. So get another reference to health bar and type in clear children. And just clean this up a little bit. Now, quick explanation of this. So whenever we call this function, we're going to get the current player's health, set that into our widget for easy access. We're going to take our health bar, clear it out visually so that essentially this is going to make no tally marks appear. It's going to do a quick check to see if the player's health is at least 0, if not greater than 0. Then it's going to do a for loop. And we're going to do a for loop starting with the first index of 1 as opposed to doing 0. and that is to make sure we don't get an extra health tally mark. So when you think about doing for loops, or really any kind of loop like this at all, it's going to do it an extra time than what you may think. So if I have a first index of 0 and let's say my current health is 3, it's going to repeat that for loop 4 times. So it's going to display 4 tally marks instead of 3, which is what our health actually is. Alternatively, we could just subtract our health value by 1 and then feed that into our last index, with leaving the first one to be 0. But I frankly find it a little bit easier to just make our first index 1 and our last index just equal our health. Then, for that loop, it's going to, for each one of our health numbers here, it's going to create a tally mark widget, and it's going to add that as a child into our health bar here. So if we go to our designer here, if we look at our health bar, we can kind of demonstrate what this is going to look like. If we drag into our health bar, our tally mark, we can see how it appears. Looks like that, okay? And if we drag in a second one here into that health bar, we can see it appears, and it will naturally size to the content and expand as needed for however many tally marks we have for our health. So each time we add one of those, it's going to add in a tally mark here. Added a stray there, but we don't want to have any tally marks already added, so let's go ahead and clear that out. All right, and we can compile and save this, and we are now done with our health bar. So we can actually close out of that. So next, in our third person character, we're going to go drag off of here. I'm going to create widget, and we are going to get our health bar. And as you can see, this option here appears for players since we set it as instance editable and expose on spawn. So we're just going to get a reference to ourself. That way it's getting the player as it is and assigning that to that reference. We're going to promote this to a variable here, and this is going to be our health bar. And then we're going to add to viewport. There we go, just like that. All right, so what this is doing is we're just creating our health bar widget here. Like I said, we are assigning ourself as the current reference to the player. If we did not do this, then update health wouldn't work. It would give you a null reference. It wouldn't be able to pull any value from player because it doesn't know what the player is. So this right here is essentially just telling our health bar that this actor right here is our player, and this is what it needs to pay attention to. This is what it needs to read that health value from. And this right here, just promoting it to a variable, is just so we can easily access functions of our health bar, which in this case, we're really just going to be accessing the update health option here. But we're going to do that when we deal with damage. Adding to viewport is pretty self-explanatory. That just makes it visible on the UI for your game. If you don't add it to the viewport, then this widget, it exists, but it isn't visually there for the player. So that's how you add it to your viewport. All right, now to test out the damage, we're going to do an event any damage node here. So let's say anytime we receive damage, we're going to set our health to be our current health minus the damage we receive. Switch this over to an integer here, drag that into our health. And then we're going to get a reference to our health bar with control and left click and drag off of that, call the update health function just like that. All right, so quick explanation, event any damage. If you ever call the apply damage node, which looks like this, it will use this any damage node on whatever you're damaging here. So if you have an enemy and it used this node on your player, it will send whatever base damage value you have here into this section here. But you can also set up your own custom functions to handle damage values, and in some cases that may be preferable depending on what you're doing. But for tutorial purposes, we're just going to use event any damage. we're going to update our health to receive that damage by getting our current health and then subtracting however much damage we took. Then setting that again to be our current health. Then we're just going to call that health bar update health there. That way it matches to be what our current health is. Now, you can set up ways that it's constantly checking, and I've seen this on some tutorials where they will use event tick to constantly update the player's health, but that's really wasteful and kind of resource intensive for no reason. You only need to update the player's health when they take damage or they get healed. So just call those functions to update that when those events happen. So in this case, we're just going to manually call in the update health anytime the player takes damage. Now for testing out that damage, we're going to just add a keyboard event here. Ideally, you should be using the enhanced input system now in Unreal Engine 5, but for testing purposes, we're just going to use a keyboard event. So anytime we press E, it will damage our player. We're going to drag off there, we're going to do apply damage. Damaged actor, we're going to get a reference to self, drag that into there, and we're just going to deal 1 damage. Not much to explain with this one, you're just applying damage to this actor, which is going to call the event any damage node. So we're just calling it on ourselves, we're dealing 1 damage, and subtracting our health by 1 each time we call this event. So anytime we hit E, we're going to lose 1 health. Pretty simple, pretty easy to explain. We can actually go ahead, go into third person map here, and we can test this out. Hit play. Let's see, our health bar appears over there at the very top there. If we hit E, drops down, hit it again, drops down again, and we can head down to 0. Right now nothing is really happening because we haven't set up any kind of event for when our player dies. It's technically not really part of this tutorial, but really quickly we'll add in just something to happen here. So after we update our health, we want to check with a branch. Hold down B and left click. We want to check with a branch if our health is less than or equal, wrong node, less than or equal to 0. And I'll just return true if it's less than 0, if it's negative health, or if it's just 0. If it's true, let's just make our player Ragdoll. So we'll get a reference to our mesh up here. Hold down Control and drag off with left click. Let go. We're going to do set simulate physics. Drag on that. Check the simulate button there. We're also going to need to do set collision enabled. And let's drag off that. Set collision to collision enabled. So quick explanation of this. Thank you, Adobe Acrobat. A quick explanation of this. So after we update our health, we want to check to make sure, is the player dead? Are they completely gone? Do they have 0 health or even negative health left? If that's the case, this branch here is going to return true. Now if you're trying to do a ragdoll system, you need to enable physics. That sounds pretty obvious, right? But we also need to enable collision here. Move these out of the way. And the reason we need to enable collision and set it to collision enabled is because by default, the player skeletal mesh, if we click into here, scroll down, and we look at our collision settings, by default, let's turn it there, it's on query only. So what query only means is that it will respond to overlaps, it will respond to hit events, but it does not be affected by collision. So gravity, anything like that, it's just going to fall through the floor. It will give a response that, oh, I hit the floor, but it's not going to stop the player's mesh from falling through the floor. Now, by default here, your player mesh is not simulating gravity or simulating physics. Well, it has gravity enabled, but it's not simulating physics. So that's not a problem because any of that collision is handled by your capsule component right here. If we look at that one's collision presets here, we can see that it has collision enabled. But since we want to do a ragdoll test, we'll need to get our skeletal mesh here, which is just called mesh. Set simulate physics to true, and we'll need to update that collision profile to be collision enabled. That way it will actually be on the ground and not just fall through the floor. Alright, so let's go and hit compile, save, and we'll test that out. Hit E a few times, we got 1 health. We jump up, hit E again, and we're dead. So just like that, that is how you create a tally mark style health bar system in Unreal Engine 5. I hope that this video was helpful for you, and I hope the explanations kind of made sense and maybe helped you learn a thing or two if you're a beginner. Feel free to leave a comment asking questions. I will try to answer them as best I can. I'd also be open to doing a C++ tutorial on this if anyone's interested in that as well. But for now, hope that was helpful. And subscribe if you would like more tutorials like this, or leave a comment on what you would like me to cover next. Thank you so much for your time.